Good to see everybody. Pull your Bibles out, open to Daniel chapter 2. If you don't have a handout, there are some handouts there in that little basket. You might just get up and get you one, or I'm sure one of the ushers will bring you one if you need one. So we're going to be in Daniel chapter 2 this morning. Before we go any further, I'm just going to ask Matt if he'll lead us in prayer for our class.
Please join me in prayer. Almighty God, thank you for this morning to come together, open your words, open our minds and hearts, and learn from you. I pray that we'll take the yoke of Christ upon us, understand the beauty of it, and willingly submit to your words and your will for our lives. I pray, God, that you would bless our church this morning, all who participate in this body here, that we would participate, that we all would find our place, that we would encourage and build one another up today in worship and in fellowship. Be with Richard as he teaches. Help him to be able to give us all those things that he has found worthy to share this morning, and we're thankful for your holy word. In Jesus we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Matt. All right, before we get started, next week, Matt's going to be with you, and I'm hoping just next week, but then he may be here the next week. I'm not sure. Depends how things go. We're in Daniel chapter 2 this morning. Also, as I looked and restudied all this and was going over it again this week, just kind of thinking about it, I'll do my best to finish the chapter today, but I may not. It may go quicker than I think. It's a long chapter if you look at it, but it's an important chapter for us to look at, and so we'll do our best. So I just want to let you know that I'm intending to, but I may not. Also, I know this about the book of Daniel. There are a lot of things that are practical in the book of Daniel that can lead to some discussion, but other things won't lead to a lot of discussion. And I understand that, but anything you have to say, anything you have to add to our study, please make sure that you do that. And if I don't hear you or see you, stand up or raise your hand or make sure that I see you or make sure that somebody hollers at me, and I'm sure that they will. So I will not intentionally overlook you. I get one-track mind when I'm thinking of something. When I'm teaching, I can't think of everything at one time like some intelligent people around here like Matt and John and Gene and others. I'm kind of focused. And if you throw me off, I don't, I can't come back, right? But we'll make it. When we look at this chapter, we got to remember what we studied last week. And basically, we studied chapter 1, a very simple chapter. We studied Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, which you know as Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We usually know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their Babylonian names, which glorifies Babylonian gods. That's interesting, isn't it? Their Hebrew names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Zachariah, and whatever. I just went there. So that was interesting. We also noted that the young men were of royalty, probably nobility from Jerusalem. They were young men. Daniel was probably about 15 years old. We're just kind of guessing somewhere in that area, trying to help understand a little better. We understand that those 4 men were chosen to be a part of the court to advise the king, and they went through a period of training, a period of also becoming healthy, and they chose not to eat the king's stuff, and they asked to be fed water and vegetables. Now, I mentioned a number of years ago, there was what was called the Daniel diet, which had to do with that, and I would probably not succeed on the Daniel diet. Some of you may, but anyhow, he succeeded. And the 4 young men were much healthier than the other fellows in training with him. And that may have been some other Hebrew young men. We don't talk about them because they're not really important to the text. So Daniel and Hananiah and Meshach or Mishael and Azariah were appointed to the court, you remember, and they were superior in all the things that they learned. Now, they didn't learn everything, but what they did learn, what they were taught, they were superior to everybody else. And you remember that Daniel was even a little step above that in that he had the ability to, God talked to him in dreams and visions. And so that's a little different than Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so you'll notice as we go through here. Now in Daniel chapter 2, I guess when we look at this, I want to show you just the structure of the chapter. We're going to look at the forgotten dream and the doomed diviners, and that should be in the little handout I've given you, I think. We're going to look, there's a proposition, and there's a prayer, and there's Daniel's preparation. That's part of this chapter. There's the dream revealed and unraveled, and it's an interesting dream. I didn't put in your notes, and I should have. We're going to basically be introducing 5 kingdoms, and you'll see that, but I didn't name them. And historically, you know what they are, and Daniel's going to tell Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 that he's 3 that he's the head of what? Gold. We go on down. So we're talking about the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, and the Roman Empire, and then God's kingdom. And we're going to introduce that. That's why this book is so very, very important for us. Because it tells us specifically when the church was established, during what period of time. And so I just think it's interesting. And then there was a reward for Daniel, and also Daniel pulled Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah in with him as far as being rewarded and being able to tell the king what the dream was and the interpretation of the dream. Of course, you know who Daniel gives credit to, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Also, there's some apocalyptic sections. I just want you to notice that chapter 7 is going to talk a little bit more about the 4th kingdom. Chapter 8, when we get over there, I'll talk about the 2nd and 3rd kingdoms. We're introducing 5 kingdoms in this chapter, remember. Chapter 11 and 12 will be regard in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th kingdoms. So the book just kind of overlaps, and that's why people have a hard time with dates trying to figure out where things are. And so just be thinking about that. Now, chapter 2, verses 1 through 49. Let's read verses 1 and 2 together. Now in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. So they came in and stood before the king. That would be pretty reasonable, wouldn't it? For the king to call in his counselors. And now, I don't know exactly how your translation necessarily translates these words, but magicians or soothsayers were one who could foretell the future. They thought foretold the future. The conjurers or enchanters or necromancers, one believed they were able to talk to the spirits, spirit world, and through their magic and spells and incantations could give advice to the king. Then there were the sorcerers, that's derived from the Hebrew, which means one that practices sorcery or witchcraft. And Chaldeans can mean a group of people, and it's a general term for inhabitants of Babylonia. So in all his counselors, he has not only these magicians and conjurers and sorcerers, but he has others in there that are his counselors. Of course, who would that include? That would include now Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, right? And for some reason, they're not there right away, but we're going to kind of look into them and see what's going on with them. Now, in chapter 2, let's read chapter 2, verses 30 to 13 together. We're going to have the king's request here of the wise men and his suspicions of their abilities. He grabs onto it right away. Of course, God's got to be working into this also, correct? Because God's in control of things. So let's just read that. I think it's interesting. The king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Now, he had a dream. He wants them to tell him what the dream is. He's going to ask them, and to interpret the dream. And you can see why he'd want to do that. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah, if Janie woke up and told me she had a dream that we ought to buy a new car, I'd say, well, let me call in some of my friends and see if they can tell me the dream and interpret it. Because, I'd want to know for sure that that's what God wanted me to do, right? So he's saying, I need to know what this is, but in order for me to know that you know what you're talking about, tell me what my dream was. Does this say he doesn't know what his dream was?
Well, he knows what it was.
It was. So I think he's putting him to the test, right? The king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. In other words, not only will you be torn from limb to limb, but what's going to happen to your family? It's gone. As a matter of fact, even your house is going to be destroyed. Would you start sweating it a little bit? I'd have been making up dreams. I don't know about you. I'd have been trying something out. Yes, John?
I think it's kind of interesting that he took this approach with them from the very beginning, which leads me to believe that perhaps their advice in the past hasn't been all that genuine or useful.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that's a good point
More
there.
flattery or things like that.
Yeah.
I'm really perturbed about this, and he's cutting to the chase. I don't want to hear the stories.
Yeah. And that would be reasonable for Nebuchadnezzar. He's an interesting fellow, isn't he? Nebuchadnezzar. Did I see another hand? Okay, so here's where we are. All right. So the king replied to the Chaldeans, well, you better do this. If you do not make known to me, you're what? You're dead. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore declare to me the dream and its interpretation. Then I can imagine them just salivating at what's the possibility of what we could have here, but they don't know what. They don't know it. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied, I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm. When I read that, I thought about my children. You ever have your children bargain for time? Well, I was pretty good at that when I was home with my mother. I would bargain for time. It very seldom ever what? And with my children, I said, no, I tried that. When I tried doing that, you kind of learn these things. He says, I know you're bargaining for time. But he says, if you don't do this, you're dead anyhow. So, I imagine they're really quite concerned. So, verse 9, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me. Is this where, John, you pick up that he is probably aware that they're not very what? Reliable. Yeah. Okay. Until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. I used to like it when Mom said, tell me the truth or I'm going to beat you to death. And so, you don't want to tell the truth, but you want to try. You ever try to get out of something, Andy, and not tell the truth? That's who married your daughter. You know what I mean? So we all know what that's like. Anyhow, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. In other words, king, you're being unreasonable. There's no man on earth that can answer this question you've asked, but they forgot about Belteshazzar, right? Matter of fact, they're not even really assured yet of all the things he can do or can't do. And so they're just challenging the king and telling him he's being unreasonable. The reason I can't understand this is they should know that Nebuchadnezzar is one you don't challenge. I mean, I would fear this guy. I would say, somehow give me a chance. Let me go think about some things. Let me spend some time thinking about this. But they said, no, you're being a little unreasonable. No king has ever asked this of any of his court before. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. And the king's thinking, well, you claim to be in touch with all the gods. right? That's what he would think, right? If you're really in touch with the gods, tell me what the dream is. So he's kind of putting them on the line. Let's see if you really are who you claim to be. You know, sometimes the people ask that about the church, don't they? Are you really who you claim to be? Well, the Chaldeans didn't have an answer to Nebuchadnezzar. We do have an answer, don't we? Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. So we know that Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not there. Correct? Now I wonder in whose purpose or plan this could be. You suppose God's got his hands in this? Absolutely, right? Because God's got a message that he wants some people to understand and to hear. And so, you know, it's very, very important that we take a look at this. God is in control. Verse 21 will tell us how much control. Anybody? John?
He also has a messenger he wants them to hear.
Yes.
So the message is important, and the messenger in this case is also important. And he's done this to separate out so that when we get to the messenger, we will get the message.
And you know what amazes me about the messenger? He's not what we would call an adult yet. I mean, you know, if he was back home in Jerusalem, he doesn't even have to pay taxes till he's, what, 20 years old. Doesn't have to go to war, right? I don't think Daniel's quite 20. He could be. We don't, you know, there's, well, I guess he would be 18, 19, perhaps, or 20, but he's still just a young man. And you're right. Look at the responsibility that God put on him. It's pretty awesome, isn't it? Something for us to teach our young people what God might expect of them. So at any rate, the king's request of the wise men is unreasonable to the wise men. He's suspicious of their abilities, and he's got them nailed, and he says, it's over. And then along comes Daniel. Right? These people can be very thankful for Daniel. Because Daniel ends up saving their what? And not only their lives, but the lives of the family. And when he interprets that dream, you know, he's just going to tell us several things about God that is going to be very, very important to us and that we're going to want to understand. Now, let's read on a little further. Before we go on, any comments? Anything want to say anything about Daniel? So, as you look at this young man, remember he's a captive, and he's on the king's court by no choice of his own. He's already challenged the king once, hasn't he? He really has. When he told the captain in charge of the eunuchs, or in charge of that group of men, I can't eat this food, and I can't drink his wine. And that's a challenge, isn't it? And we find out that God is with him and blesses him and overcomes the difficulty that it could be for him. Now he's coming before the king. And he's going before the king and saying, well, let's see what he says. Let's look at it, verse 14. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. Could Arioch have just cut his head off as soon as he saw him? Yeah. I think Daniel's got a reputation already. I think Daniel has already set himself up as a wise man. He said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. And you can see Daniel probably thinking about that, right? I mean, he knows that the king has put the wise men, that group of men that he is known as a part of now. Those Chaldea, the group of men that comes into account. Daniel knows that his life's on the line also. Daniel knows that Nebuchadnezzar has had it. And so he goes on to say, So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him in time, in order that he might declare the interpretation of the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Notice he uses their God-given names, or their Israeli names, which glorifies who? God. So Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are on a quest now. And that is spend some time in prayer so that God will give Daniel the answer to the king's questions. And I think it's very important that Daniel just didn't say, "Dear king, I can interpret this for you now." Because Daniel didn't have a clue, did he? Not a clue. And so he went to his three friends and he says, "We need to do something about this. And we need to pray about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery." So, verse 18, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So is Daniel trying to save all the wise men of Babylon? Oh, I think he's concerned about who?
Him and his friends.
He and his three friends. That's what I think. Now, who's going to benefit from his concern? All the wise men, right? Okay. So, here it is. The secret's revealed to Daniel. I think I'm okay there. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Remember, Daniel has the ability to receive dreams and visions. There's a difference between a dream and a vision. What's the difference?
A vision comes to you from the Lord. I think a dream probably manifests from your own subconscious.
What works for me? Okay. In other words, he's seeing the vision, right? He is not asleep. In a dream, would you be asleep? We would think so, right? Okay. So it's in a vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. What's it mean to bless the God of heaven? Praising him? Anything else? We talk about it, huh?
Give him glory.
Give him glory. Speak well of him. Gratitude. I mean, we really need to think about specific words, don't we, sometimes? And the importance of the word. So the text says this, so far. Nebuchadnezzar went with an unreasonable request as far as his advisors were concerned. And the request was, I had a dream, tell me what the dream was and interpret it for me. They said, we can't do it. Nebuchadnezzar finally says, okay, you're all what? Dead. Well, you know what I mean. Then Daniel hears about it because Arioch, the captain of the bodyguard, was looking for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, correct? Because he was going to put them to death. And Daniel says, just give me time. Says the king, give me time. And Daniel goes immediately to his friends and tells them about it. And they took the measure needs to help Daniel get his answer. And that would be being in contact with God and praising God and asking God for help. Gene.
Finally, not to back up on you, but interesting.
Now, wait a minute.
I know, I do it.
He said not to back up on you. What does that mean? I'm going to back up on you. Go ahead.
Well, in chapter 1, when Nebuchadnezzar interviewed Daniel, he said he found him 10 times wiser than the magicians and sorcerers. It's rather interesting that he called upon them first. Didn't give them any time, but he then, Daniel, obviously there was a relationship there that he appreciated he was smarter than those men.
Yeah,
Gave him the time.
that's kind of why Nebuchadnezzar is interesting, because you remember Arioch is looking for them because he's going to put them to death. Now, apparently, when all these fellows were called in, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were overlooked somehow, right? We don't know. They could have been on a mission for the king or something, whatever. And so it is interesting. You'll see he's interesting as you go through the study, that he doesn't have them in his court right away. Go ahead.
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Tim.
There's a lesson here for me. Daniel's at a crisis point.
Yeah.
His life's on the line, but he does not panic.
Well, that's an interesting comment. He doesn't, does he?
He does not panic. What he does is pray. Panic shows your hopelessness. And prayer shows your hope in God. So at this point in time, this point of crisis,
Okay.
Daniel decides, I'm going to find some faithful friends, and I'm going to take this thing to God.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I really didn't think of it that much, that he's at a point of crisis here and stuff. And he doesn't seem to allow that to control him, does he? You'll see that in the fiery furnace, and you'll see it in the lion's den, correct? So thanks for bringing that up. Anybody else? Yes.
I picture this as an action movie in my head, and I picture like he's trying to figure out what it is, and he calls his other guys in, and they're scared from the get-go. Like they don't want to see him because they realize there's no way that they know what the dream is. But Daniel's faith in God from the beginning has nothing to fear of, and I feel like Nebuchadnezzar probably appreciates like him like going to see him without even being asked and telling him that he'll take care of it for him. So I think that's why the king gave him more time, probably because I picture him appreciating the courage and strength Daniel showed going to him, whether instead of like cowering away.
Okay. Anybody else? Let's see where the story goes now, all right? Look at it. We'll start at verse 19 again. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. For wisdom and power belong to who? To God. So here's the amazing thing. Daniel gets the answer that he needs, and he doesn't run to Nebuchadnezzar right away. What does he do? Praises God and gives thanks, okay? Look at verse 21. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. What's he declaring there? Sovereignty of who? God. In other words, God is in control of what? Whether we like it or not. And I know everybody has different... I believe God sets up kings and takes down kings today, whether we like it or not. What we have to learn to do is be like Daniel, correct? So he says, Lord, you are the great one. You are the one who put Nebuchadnezzar on the throne. Isn't that what he's saying? You're the one that does that, and you'll be the one that takes him down. And it's kind of like, since you're that, Lord, what do I have to, Tim? Fear, right? Now, this is still a young man, correct? And when we think of young men like this, we don't think of that kind of wisdom, but they can have that kind of wisdom, can't they? Because who gives man wisdom? Was it not James? I think, didn't you teach us in the book of James, John, that if you want wisdom, pray for it? Ask for it.
But don't be a picky judge about it.
Well, you had to throw that in, right?
Yeah.
Right. So when you look at this young man, God may be trying to teach us something as parents of the kind of things we should be teaching our children about the power of God and what God can do in their lives. I think God still does these things. That's myself. That's me. So anyhow, notice, it is he who reveals the profound, not hidden things. You know, I put Deuteronomy 29:29 up there because it says he reveals certain things, but the hidden things belong to who? To God, okay? So he reveals profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. So you look at his declaration of God there, and before he even goes into Nebuchadnezzar, he's doing more than saying thanks. He is making a declaration of exactly who God is and the power that he has. And sometimes we may leave that out of our prayer life, you know, recognizing God for who he is and what he does and his capabilities. And so we might kind of take a look at this and think about this and look at this young fella here and his attitude towards God. Verse 23, to you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise. You have given me wisdom and power. So Daniel recognizes right now that all that 3 years of training, the wisdom he gained in that, wasn't given to him by the Babylonians, but by who? By God, okay? Right? Is at this point. Because he's going before a king that can say what? I don't want to hear it. You're gone. All right. Therefore, Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and spoke to him as follows. Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. One man or 4 men become a savior to all those other men there. Because he knew to whom to go and he knew who to serve. So Daniel, who the Babylonians called Belteshazzar, and Hananiah, Meshach, and Abednego, who the Babylonians call Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you know what I mean. They all have something to learn from these men, that they've tried to give names to glorify their gods. So we might think about that in our lives, as we go through life. Everything that we need, that we do, needs to glorify who?
God.
Thank you. God, okay? God, everything. So any comments or anything anybody wants to say? Yes, Gene.
Well, it says, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. You could think, Daniel, those were somewhat of competition to you. It would have increased his power even more.
But he's not interested in what?
Power.
But what does he get? Power.
Yeah.
Daniel ends up very powerful in the Babylon kingdom, doesn't he? Who does that remind you of? Who? Joseph. Joseph sold into slavery, goes to prison. You know the whole story. He ends up interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh, and he ends up being second in command to who? In other words, before you get to Pharaoh, you go through who? Joseph. So God is in control. Anybody else?
Solomon.
I didn't hear.
Who asked for wisdom and ended up with riches and power.
Yeah, he did. And isn't it a shame, though, what happened to Solomon? Didn't use it, did he? So that's it, huh?
I said women.
That's not men's problem, surely. A woman would have to say, well, a man didn't say that, did he? But anyhow, you're right. You're 100% right. He allowed women to turn him away from who? God. So, Solomon prayed for wisdom. God gave it to him. God expects you to what? Use it properly. All right. So, any other comments? As you can see, we're not going to make it through chapter 2, but we're going to try to get there. Maybe I'll summarize it real quick when we get over there. But there are some things that we want to take a look at. Daniel goes before the king, and this is what he says to the king. Okay, we'll go to that in just a minute. Let's take a good look at it. And I know I'm doing all the reading. It's just easier for me to go through this right now. Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him. In other words, he didn't tiptoe, right? He got it done immediately because has still been charged with doing what? Killing the wise men. And so he hurriedly goes in. Another thing that interests me about this also, like Joseph art with the jailer. And Joseph, even with the first guy that bought him. They trusted him. And you go here with Arioch, and Arioch seems to trust who? Daniel. Because he could have said what to Daniel? No. The king has come down and given an order or a decree. All right. So he went into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. In other words, I have the answer to your question. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. So he'd have said, well, Belteshazzar, Daniel's writing of himself, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to you. So Daniel says that he basically is not able to make known, correct? I think that's what he's saying. Kind of risky, isn't it? Okay? However, I might have put but there. Okay, but however, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in latter days. Now, is Nebuchadnezzar going to listen to a God? This doesn't mean he's a one God king, does it? But Daniel says there is a God in heaven who can answer your question. This was your dream and the vision in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. In other words, the first one to receive a message about, well, Babylon, Medo-Persia, the Grecian Empire, and the Roman Empire, and the stone, or, you know, the other king was who? Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel hadn't received the dream yet, had he? So Nebuchadnezzar. At least I think that's interesting. Hope I'm not stretching that too far. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me. Right? Daniel says, I didn't know it. For any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king. In other words, king, I didn't know anything about this dream, and it hasn't been revealed to me for any of my glory. Right? It's been revealed to me so that I can make this known to you, answer this question, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. So he's very direct about this. He doesn't take credit for who? He doesn't take credit for himself, does he? Y'all like to take credit for things? I do. I did that. I thought about that. That was my idea. You ever do that? Can you believe Art stole my idea? I'm never going to tell him another idea in my whole life. He's looking at me, he said, yeah, you will. But you know, the idea is, you got to admire Daniel. And I'm going to throw this at you again. We sometimes treat Daniel too much like a children's story. Daniel in the lion's den. Our children need to know that there's more about Daniel than being in the lion's den. Why was he able to walk into the lion's den? That's basically what he did, right? Why was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego able to just let them guys take him into the... They didn't care. Well, I'm not saying he didn't care about dying. I mean, it'd be horrible to think that I'm going to be burned alive, right? But they said, if God doesn't want us to die, we won't what? And if he does, right? So when you look at these young men, try to think about their spiritual relationships that they have with Jehovah God and their understanding of who he is and what he can do. It's pretty awesome and pretty powerful. Any other comments? We're not going to make it, are we? So we'll pick up, though, because, well, let's finish reading. Did we read it all? Did I read through 30? I did, didn't I? The king's dream is, we have time to read the king's dream. We're going to go into, well, I want to go on verse 28 again. We've already talked about that. Shows in whom Daniel trusted, you know, and he doesn't hesitate to glorify God. And 31 through 45 is the interpretation of the dream. And let's just set the dream forth, because next week we're going to go over guidelines for proper interpretation. Not next week, but hopefully the week after that. Let's read this. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time. And because like chaff from the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. In other words, this stone is going to make it appear as if you never what? Existed. And we're going to talk about that, okay? Any comments before we close out? I did hear the first bell, didn't I? Okay, second bell should be in less than a minute. All right, so Matt is going to be with you next week, and he's going to share some great things with you. I don't know what he's going to share, but I know they're going to be great things. And we'll go from there. So thank you for your attention.